Welcome back to They Say It Takes a Village. Now, some of you probably know that this podcast and Wear That Now have formed a beautiful partnership where they've kindly offered me these gorgeous outfits to wear on these episodes because I have literally ran out of everything to wear. Now, for those of you who don't know how Wear That Now works or their concept, I'll explain it. If you head over to their Instagram account, click the link on their bio, fill out their style survey, they will then pair you up with one of their incredible stylists who will curate a box of outfits to fit your style, your budget, and your occasion. That box will then get sent straight to your doorstep for you to try on the clothes in the comfort of your own home. The outfits that you love, you keep, and the ones that you don't, you simply return. It's as easy as that. So if you're anything like me, the idea of going to a crowded mall with young children gives you anxiety. Do yourself a favor. Head over to their Instagram account, which is at wear.that.now. Fill out their style survey and start shopping from the comfort of your own home. So if you've just tuned into this episode, you might want to get comfortable because my next guest is nothing short of extraordinary. She has been awarded the very prestigious Pride of Australia Award. She is the international spokesperson and advocate for diversity and inclusion. She is a world-class swimmer who represented Australia for 7 years and competed in the 2004 Paralympic Games. She's an author, a mother, a wife. The list goes on. Jessica Smith is literally sitting across the table from me to talk to me about her incredible and extraordinary life and the message that she's sharing with the world. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to the amazing Jessica.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh my goodness, it was a long time coming. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm very excited. Thank you for having me.
Me too, honestly. And I just feel like I have to tell everybody the story of how we met just because it's honestly serendipity for the podcast.
Yes.
I met you. Well, to be honest, I think, I met you or I just kind of ambushed you.
It was a nice introduction. Yeah.
I ambushed her at the uniform store.
It was.
It was about a year and some. About a year ago.
Yeah.
And I literally spotted you in the corner and I thought, oh my gosh, it's a sign. I'm at the uniform store hating my life. I'm definitely going to go up to her and introduce myself. And that's where we are now.
Exactly. And I'm so glad you did. I know it's been a long time coming, but, I think the universe brings people together for very important reasons. And then it's just a matter of time to make everything happen. So here we are.
That's true. Exactly. It's the perfect timing.
Yes.
I'm so grateful. I know how busy you are and 3 kids and a full schedule. And it's not easy. I always find people's time is always the most precious. And I'm grateful for yours.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited for everyone to hear your story. Honestly, I feel like in every stage in your life, it was just very exciting and sort of, I don't know, it's full and
Yeah, it's been full and it's been exciting, but obviously lots of hurdles and obstacles along the way. But I think because of those challenges, I'm then able to focus on, the highs and the lows. And that's what makes it full and exciting.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I've got like 1,000 questions that I'm going to ask you. Okay. So I'm going to start right at the beginning and take you all the way back.
Yeah.
Childhood, you grew up, we just had a bit of a conversation before the camera started and you've been here for about
5.5 years.
5.5 years. Yeah. And prior to that, you grew up in Australia.
Yes, that's correct. So I was born in Australia, born in Sydney, actually, the first of 4 children. And I was born missing my left arm. And to this day, we still don't know why that happened. It was just one of those things. Yeah. And at the time, the world and especially the medical professionals looked at disability in a very sort of through a medical lens and they wanted to fix me. And so they advised my parents to have me fitted with a prosthetic limb from as young as possible. And of course, my parents wanted to give me the best start at life. So I was fitted with my first fake arm when I was about 18 months of age.
That's very young.
It's very young. Yeah. And I think, the idea was that it would help with my growth and development. But what people didn't understand was that my brain never has been wired to have two hands. So when I put on the prosthesis, it was really difficult to get used to. Never mind the fact that I was a toddler and that it would have been difficult anyway. But it was heavy and it was awkward and it didn't really resemble a human hand at all. And one particular morning, my mum was making morning tea and I noticed a plate of chocolate biscuits on the kitchen bench. So I snuck behind her and I reached up with the prosthesis to take a biscuit. But because I couldn't feel or detect heat, I didn't realize that I had knocked a freshly boiled kettle in that same process.
I did read that.
Yeah. And so as I looked up, boiling water spilled down onto myself and I sustained 3rd-degree burns to 15% of my body.
Oh my goodness.
It was like 2 or 3 years of recovery in and out of hospital. And
that's right, because you don't feel the heat.
Yeah. You know, you have this, mechanical arm and obviously the technology back then is nothing like what it is today, but still there's no way of being able to feel
have that feeling hot and cold.
And,
how old were you then?
I was 2.
Very young.
Very, very young.
Very young.
So I don't remember that traumatic time itself, but obviously I grew up in a world where appearance is so unfairly associated with success and, this pressure that especially young women face on how to be and what our identity is. And so growing up in a world where I was told I wasn't good enough, I wasn't pretty enough, strong enough, smart enough, I really struggled as a young child to figure out my place in the world. Yeah. And I remember being acutely aware of that from like age 5.
That's also very young.
Yeah. I think to have this mindset that I knew that I was different.
That was my next question. Well, I find, sometimes if you face a traumatic event that you're not prepared for, like you just said, you don't know, it's not like your brain was wired to have an arm. Mm-hmm. So for you, it's just life and you're happy and it's all fine. It's your interactions that shape the experience. Yeah. So when did you feel at that point, or what was your earliest memory of you feeling that you were a little bit different?
I think it was probably when I started school, and I saw that all the other kids had 2 hands. And even though I have 3 younger brothers and, growing up with them, none of them have a disability. No one else in my immediate family has a disability. So I knew that I was different, but my parents and my brothers were really of the mindset that they weren't going to feel sorry for me. They were there to support me, to encourage me to try. But then when you step out into the wider community.
That's right. And you're not cocooned in the safety and the mindset of your own home.
Exactly. And the pointing and the staring from other people, it's so invasive and it's quite overwhelming because, as you said, for me, that's my normal. And I'm just trying to fit in. I'm just trying to be like every other child who wants to have fun and play and, go on the swing and all of this sort of stuff. But to constantly have eyes on me and for people don't want to talk about it, it made me feel like there was something wrong with me. Yeah. And that's really unfair as a child. And sort of if I take myself out of the scenario and look in onto, a younger child experiencing that, it's horrible.
It is.
And it shaped how I viewed myself and how I viewed other people. And so growing up, even though I was very shy and very reserved and embarrassed of the way that I looked, I wanted to push against the status quo. Yeah. There was something inside that empowered me to say I had to push back. I had to show that I was capable of more than just my physical appearance. The most obvious way for me to do that was through movement and through sport and activity. It made sense that if I could outperform the kids in the park, whatever it was, then maybe people would see past my obvious imperfections and then I'd be accepted. So it was this constant desire to very much be pleasing other people. And, whether that's right or wrong, that's the reality of what I was facing with. I had to be doing the best at every single thing I tried in order to counteract the fact that I had a disability. And that was my mindset from as young as I can remember. And has it served me? I think it has.
It definitely does. Yeah, it definitely has. But I can imagine it might have, it can get exhausting. And it gets to a point where, look, I think regardless of anything, I feel even as adults, we all do to a certain extent try to fit in. That I feel we are naturally wired to do that. And then if you throw in something, and honestly, it's not really an adversity. It's just a difference. Yeah. You're a variation of me or anybody else. But that variation out of whatever is considered normal can be, like you said, you're overcompensating with something else. And for a child, that's a lot.
It is. And for me, it did lead to a lot of, other issues in my life. Like I didn't see myself represented in mainstream media. I never saw disability portrayed in a beautiful way. Yeah. So whenever I was looking at, was going back before social media, like magazines, television shows, movies, typically the villain or the character that we were supposed to be afraid of had a disability or disfigurement of some type. So when I was trying to make sense of my identity, I saw myself in a way that other people were scared of and afraid of. And that's really hard as well, to try and say, well, that's not how I see myself. And when you're not represented, when you don't have that sense of validation, for sure, I tried so many other ways to change what I could control about my body. So I knew my arm was never going to grow back. I was always going to have scarring. If I could make my body perfect in every other way to fit the societal parameters of what is considered beautiful and perfect, maybe then, again, I would be accepted. And I think, you touched on that. We're all longing to feel a connection, to feel as though we belong. And for me, I decided that, if I could lose weight and if my body could fit within the realms of what society thought was beautiful, maybe then everything would be okay. And so, I started in this world of dieting and restrictive eating from basically, I had this unhealthy relationship with food from as long as I could remember. But it started to take more of an effect when I started swimming.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, before you started swimming, through your teenage years, I find teenage years are particularly difficult. And I think, number one, even prior to that, younger kids, they're mean. Kids are mean. I don't know if it's just their blatant honesty or, this idea. I feel like now we're a little bit more mindful about things like bullying and just generally. But I find the next stage that is quite difficult is teenage. And I did read, I think you mentioned it in one of your articles, that you had a particularly tough time during your teenage years.
It was really tough. I was battling with bulimia and anorexia and depression. Mental illnesses were not spoken about at all when I was a teenager. There was so much stigma, so much guilt. And so that was a secret that I lived with for more than a decade, because I already felt as though I was a burden on society by being a female with a disability. So who was I to then say, actually, I'm struggling with so many more things? Yeah. It was like, don't talk about that. Like, nobody wants to hear that. And I also feel that living with a disability, there's a pressure that I feel, and a lot of other people with disability feel, is that people without a disability gain inspiration from us. And therefore, it's an immense pressure that we, again, have to continually achieve to the highest level, because it's uncomfortable for people without a disability to see us struggle or to see us in pain or being challenged, if that makes sense.
It does. It's too much for people, and therefore they don't want to validate it or even talk about it.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're trying to say. It's just, it's so true.
Yeah.
You want to gain inspiration, and you want to highlight all the wonderful things, all the abilities that, you perform or you do, whereas you're also a human being with a full range of emotions and complexities. And just like we struggle, every other person, but it's funny. It's a perception, a perception that, I feel like you're slowly shifting the narrative and changing the space, but it's strange. I don't know why people are like this, honestly, but it's funny that you actually said that.
Yeah. And I think for me, I had a lot of resentment and a lot of anger growing up at the rest of the world. Why was I born this way? Yeah. Why did I have to look this way? It wasn't fair. I didn't ask for this to be my reality. And it was actually through meeting my husband. He's very sort of black and white. And he said to me when we first met, I'd never seen anyone with a disability before. I was like, what are you talking about? Of course you have. You just aren't aware. You aren't opening your eyes to the rest of the world. But what I realized was that I can't not validate his perception either. So what he was saying was true for him. He didn't see disability the way I saw disability. He was very much oblivious.
Yeah.
He wasn't intentionally trying to be mean or cruel or nasty. He was just saying that in his world, he doesn't see it.
Yeah.
And obviously since meeting me, now he does. And he's very grateful for that.
Yeah.
But I was also grateful for what he was saying, because it allowed me to realize that people, I don't believe, are intentionally trying to hurt my feelings or anything like that. It's a level of not understanding, not being aware, fearful that they're going to hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
And so
it's just because they don't know if anything might upset you
Yes.
or offend you.
Yes.
But in that is also doing you a bit of a disservice, because it is what it is.
Exactly.
You know, and it's just, I find that it's very, it's an honest statement. Was that fairly early on in your relationship?
Very early, to the point where I was like, I'm never going to
speak to this person again.
But it was really interesting. I think it was at a time in my life where I was starting to question the fact that, you know, I'm more disabled by my environment and a lack of accessibility and the way people treat me than anything my body can or can't do.
Yeah.
But how could I articulate that message to everybody? And in order for me to be able to deliver a message, I have to be willing to listen to what people are saying back and what their experiences are in order for that to grow and develop. And so through him saying that, I was definitely taken aback, but he was right. And that was the reality for so many people. So if I want to see a change in society, I have to be part of that change. I have to share my story. Again, that goes back to not everyone with a disability needs to be an advocate for disability either. I think there's still a lot of pressure and stigma on that. Like, why can't we just have someone who lives with a disability who's a leader in finance or someone who is
a business?
Exactly.
Who is a mother?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But typically when you speak to someone with a disability, we hone in on that experience. For me, that's fine because that's what my work is and I want to be able to do that. But it's also about shining a light on the fact that there is more about me. And there's a lot more about me.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to have the opportunity to share all of those stories.
Just to take you back to, I'm just going to go back to teenage years. You said that you lived with bulimia and anorexia for a decade.
Yeah.
When was the point? Did you feel that this isn't enough? This can't go on?
So I hit my ultimate rock bottom. I'd been representing Australia in the sport of swimming for about 8 years.
Okay, so that sort of coincided.
I was able to mask a lot of my career in 2004 to represent Australia at the Paralympic Games. It was when my body just completely gave up. So I was supposed to medal in 5 events, 3 individual and 2 relay, but I was the only member of the Australian Paralympic team to not make a final. Yeah. And I haven't even been able to say those words until probably the last 5 years because I was so ashamed. But it was because my eating disorder had taken over. And I returned to Australia and I was admitted to a rehab facility. And it was at that point where I knew that I had to focus on my health and well-being. Otherwise, I know I wouldn't be here today. And so it was but it was rock bottom. Like I had to walk away from my swimming career. I had to end so many different friendships and relationships that were associated with that time because of the toxicity that was associated with that. And to be able to do that and to be able to walk away from the pool, which was all of my identity at that time, it was terrifying to know that if I have to leave it all and then just trust that the next step is going to unfold. And so there's so much fear in that, but it allowed me to sort of close the door on that chapter of my life and to seek the treatment and the help that I needed. And that wasn't overnight.
No, of course
either.
not.
You know, I mean, even to this day, we're forever always working on ourselves.
I've recently heard something that I found really quite powerful because especially around things that are habits or the way, sort of addictions or whatever it might be. It was almost like a scale. Yeah. It goes up, it goes down, but as long as the non-habit is still up, it's still there. Yeah. It's still there. There's still a small weight. And I think that goes for everybody, we all have this scale in any aspect of our lives. And it's definitely not one of those things that's an overnight and you'll be fine. It's an ongoing thing, a lifelong thing. And it's it's one of those things that I feel, do you not find that it kind of shifted your path a little bit?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think that's terrifying as well, right? If you're in that moment of you thought you had a path or you were comfortable in that space, not wanting to change.
And sort of the rug gets pulled from under you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what I would then go on to, because my biggest fear was that without swimming, I would just be a girl with a disability. And I didn't want that. I was terrified of that because society isn't kind in that regard. And so every step of, furthering my studies and my career was about being comfortable outside of my comfort zone. Okay. And as an introvert, which I absolutely am, it was so scary. But I know that, I look back and I think it was the parallels that I was able to draw from my swimming career about goal setting and being determined and being driven, and apply that to everything else that I do today. So focusing on the goal setting and knowing what I want to achieve, and okay, well, what are the steps that I need to take to make that happen? And just continuously being adamant about perseverance and not getting myself back into the stage where I allowed everything to be too overwhelming. And for me, I just have to focus on every day is a different day.
Yeah.
And I have the opportunity to show up or not show up. But if I don't show up, the only person that suffers is me.
Yep.
And I think that comes from that innate ability from when I was a child into my swimming and what I can do today. And for that, I'm grateful. I don't know if that comes from my parents or the universe just blessed me with something else to be able to say, this is what is going to drive me.
Yeah. Do you think if you were to go back to that point when you feel like you've hit rock bottom, do you think that there was this, did you think that you were at a point where you thought, okay, you know what? I'm not there's that sort of light bulb moment that went off, and I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. I'm going to get through this program. I'm going to get through everything and I'm going to come out the other end? Or it's sort of an everyday battle?
I think there were glimmers of that.
Yeah.
Because if there weren't, then I don't know why I would have kept going. So there were certainly glimmers of that, but I definitely sat in a place of complete depression and anxiety for a very, very long time. But I knew that the alternative was that I would no longer be here, and I didn't want that. So it was worth every day just to try that little bit extra.
You've mentioned in a couple of your interviews, and I find this I found it really, really powerful, because you've mentioned that body image is very, very misunderstood. And I wanted to get your sort of thoughts on that. What made you say that? Why do you feel that that is the case?
So for me, when I was growing up, obviously body image was a really prominent thought and fear and, issue that I had. And it stemmed from living with a disability. But there was this narrative at the time that eating disorders and mental health around body image was sort of focused on young white women. And in my experience with everyone that I was talking to, I worked in oncology research for many, many years. They were also struggling with body image issues because of treatment and medicine. And I was like, this isn't necessarily about the aesthetics. For some people, absolutely. But we're talking about disability, ethnicity, religion, culture, mental health. All of these things impact how we see ourselves. And so when we talk about body image, I was getting tired of the conversation always being about, well, this is what beautiful is. Yes, we have the beauty standards, of course, but what was making people hate their body so much? And the stories were similar, but also different. And so I realized that it wasn't just about me and my story. It was about making sure that I opened up the conversation to hearing all of these different perspectives. And through that, it was like, it's so much more complex than what we think. And especially at the time, when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, it was like, we need to be able to have more conversations. But the struggle that I had was trying to have those conversations with the right people. And so I was very lucky in Australia. I worked with a lot of not-for-profit organizations, and then with government, and then with private organizations, to create a lot of research around what is body image and what does this look like. And then I decided that I would sort of focus on what it meant for people living with a disability, because within disability, there's so much diversity. Absolutely. Right? There's 1.8 billion people living with disability, and most people will then think of someone who uses a wheelchair. But only 8% of people with disability use a wheelchair, but we have this universal sign that disability is around the wheelchair.
Yeah.
But the majority of people living with disability have a disability that you can't see. You know? So how do we make sure that this conversation includes all of these different ideas and different disability, all of this together, and understanding that people's body image can be really impacted by all of these things.
Yeah. That's actually so interesting. It's so true. There is a universal sign. I mean, it's there even on parking
Exactly.
spaces.
So this is what a lot of people think about. You think about what is accessibility for people with disability.
Right.
Where's the ramp?
The ramp.
Yeah. But it encompasses so much more, you know, and so I'm trying so hard to be able to have these conversations and, you know, over the last
shift
few
their
years,
narrative.
Yeah, exactly.
And have conversations for total inclusion as opposed to just for this or this group of people or for that person.
Exactly.
It's hard work.
It is hard work. And, you know, certainly there's times where it can be exhausting because especially when you're having conversations with people who don't understand or they haven't been able to think about that perspective yet. But that's part of my job, is to be able to say, have you thought about this? Can we think about this together? And how can we look at inclusion and accessibility in more broader terms?
I'm going to quote you again. You once said, one of the most powerful things that's happened in my life is when you became an Australian Paralympic swimmer in 2004. What did you mean by that?
It was...
Is that when you started?
That was when I had sort of finished. That was like the end of my swimming career.
End of the swimming. Oh, yes. In 2004.
I think it was all of the hard work, all of the sacrifice had come to that moment and I had finally reached the pinnacle.
I read it and I was like, I wasn't sure if powerful good or powerful.
Powerful because of what it represented and symbolized for me personally, but also where the conversation was around the Paralympic movement and disability at that time, which was almost non-existent. And it's really interesting to see just how much things have changed over the years when you look at sport for people with disability. And I like to think that myself and a lot of other people who were competing at that time have been able to create a positive path forward for the athletes who have come behind us. It was only just in the Tokyo Paralympic Games that the Australian government finally agreed that Paralympic athletes who won gold, silver or bronze would be paid. And they've been paying the Olympians for many, many, many years.
They've not been paying the Paralympic?
No. And so you have this massive
and that's
division.
Just only recently?
Just from Tokyo. So Tokyo and then obviously the upcoming Paris Games, Australian Paralympic athletes who win gold, silver or bronze will be
Was there a
paid.
reason for that?
No funding. Nobody was interested. No sponsorship. You know, that big cycle of where does that money come from for the Paralympic athletes? And, you know, we've had to be continually proving ourselves, right? And at the time when I was competing, there was no
endorsements and things like that. Yeah.
There was no media coverage. There was no sponsorship because there was no media coverage, right? So this big cycle of, well, how do we break in to be able to support athletes with a disability who are competing and performing at the elite level? It's changed a lot, but it was very different in my time. So when I say it was a powerful moment, it was powerful because I know that maybe the athletes competing now have no idea who I am or what my story is, but together with other people that were competing for Australia, we have continued to fight for where they are today. And so I know that, you know, everything that we've worked toward is leading to change. And you have to be able to do that knowing that that change may never benefit you personally. I think that's a very tough thing.
But it's a universal benefit. It's almost like paving the way.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's one experience after the other. Your experiences, your potential sort of, you know, your teammates' experience, whatever it might be. These small incremental changes. I mean, I wouldn't say small, but incremental changes along the way. And, you know, that's how we make a change.
Absolutely.
I mean, it will never be like a night and day thing, but it's as you go through. I am absolutely shocked though.
Yeah, I know. And I don't think most people were even aware because when it happened,
I thought it's a career.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. It's very, very difficult. So when I was training, I was also studying science at uni. I was working 2 jobs and then I was training morning and night. And I remember one night I was like, I just want to order a pizza. And I was trying to find coins around my house to be able to pay for a pizza. Like, no, it's not a career.
My gosh.
Yeah, it's really tough. And so when I found out, you know, there was a lot of media around it at the time that yes, Paralympic athletes will now be paid. I remember being so emotional for two reasons, a little bit sad, but also thankfully we have created this change and, and rightfully so. But that's the important message for so many people, around the world, is that we have to continue to do the right thing, and we have to continue to be a positive role model and know what our role and responsibilities are to help everybody else around us. As you said, it's a universal benefit. And especially when we talk about women and equality and equity, we'll never see that in our lifetime, but that doesn't mean that we don't work towards it.
Stop advocating for it.
Exactly. Because we will. So many people have come before us. So many trailblazers. I think about my mom and my grandma, everything they had to go through in order to give me the life that I have today.
Absolutely.
I have to pay it forward for my daughter and for her children and for everybody else. So that is exactly why I do the work when we talk about disability inclusion and accessibility. I know that for many years I didn't want to talk about it. I was still trying to disassociate myself from having a disability. But now I know that I have a platform and I have a voice and I have a responsibility to speak not just for myself, but for the others who literally can't, whether that's metaphorically or the fact literally they're not able to voice their concerns. So it's a huge privilege as well.
It is a privilege and almost a huge responsibility.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
it is.
I wanted to ask you, why swimming?
That's a good question. I played all sorts of sports when I was a young child in Australia.
Active and athletic,
I think it was one of the only sports where, obviously it's an individual sport.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of pressure I felt whenever I played team sport, that if for whatever reason we didn't win,
you would be extra sensitive.
I would always be, and swimming was, I couldn't use any aids. I couldn't use any devices to help me in the water. It was literally just me and my body. And so I think that was, again, another opportunity for me to prove that, hey, I can do this. I'm capable of being able to swim really fast and do it really well. And I remember my first school swimming event. I won the 50 meters freestyle, beating all the girls and boys with two hands. And in that moment, I felt as though I was finally being acknowledged for what I could do rather than limited by the perceived assumption from others about what they thought I couldn't. You sit in that feeling of like, oh my God,
look what I've
done something pretty amazing here. You want to sit with that forever. And swimming gave me that, but obviously the natural talent as well. Right? So when you continue to improve and to win medals and break records, it's a good feeling.
Pushes you further. It gives you a bit more confidence. And you sort of think, no, you know what? I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
It's honestly amazing. I keep thinking to myself, I'm always so curious as to what sparks that joy or that thing that takes somebody to an elite athlete level. I mean, I like swimming. I generally run, but I don't think I've got it in me to be able to ever get to that point as an elite athlete. I've always been so fascinated about how you guys just take it up to the next level.
I think it's a different mindset.
It is.
Well. And I think
it's so much discipline.
It's a lot of discipline, and I think also not necessarily healthy all the time. You know what I mean? And what that drive is and where the motivation comes from.
Do you think the swimming and a little bit of the eating disorder came hand in hand? Or?
Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that pardon the pun, but they kind of fed each other. Like there was a lot of disordered eating around me. And it was kind of just, well, that's just what happens when you're an athlete. This is, if you want to take it seriously, then this is what you have to do. And so that's what I mean. The higher you get in your sport, the pressure is so intense. Every little millisecond, every, kilo, whatever, it matters. Because
you have to be physically so, there needs to be this sort of physical performance. And it is a lot of physical.
Yeah.
And the focus is physical. And I feel the mental aspect, it's kind of following what you're doing, but it might be deteriorating along the way.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of elite athletes, there's lots of stories out now. There's, a lot of Netflix series as well following, like, for example, Michael Phelps. And I think it's called The Weight of Gold, like the pressure that he felt. And a lot of athletes can relate to that, maybe not to the extent of what his performances, what is the pressure that he particularly felt. But I think that let's word it a different way. Would I want my children to be elite athletes? No. Yeah. Not at all.
Yeah. Unless it feeds their soul and they're
Unless
really,
it does.
yeah.
And I think, yes, of course, if you see all that potential and they want it and that drive is coming from them and they're really committed, of course, I'm going to support that as much as I can.
But I think
I've just seen a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine.
A lot that I think I don't want my children to experience.
Toxicity and unhealthy, sort of relationships with all sorts of things. And I get it. And I find a lot of it, it's not just that. I find, do you not think that, yes, being an elite athlete, you've got a bit of pressure. I feel like if you are at the top of any game, in any aspect of life, there will be a certain level of pressure, burnout, whatever it is, where if you haven't sort of nursed and looked after mental health, it's not sustainable. And I think that is for lots of things. I think if you are, a massive entrepreneur, if you are an elite athlete, if you are a person who's, sort of an amazing brain surgeon or whatever it might be, there gets to a point where you feel like you have gotten to your maximum capability, but also at the same time, what did it take to get there kind of thing? And I think that's the scary part, because I always, you always want the best for your children, but you also want them there to reach their full potential. And there's also this constant balance of trying to make sure that, yes, it's great. It's great to win this, and it's great to do that. And it's great to outperform whoever it might be. But also, having said that, if that didn't happen, that's okay. And, we've put these foundations in place. And I find, it's tough. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's tough now that you've got little ones, and if they all of a sudden say to you that they want to compete competitively. So,
and I think, you touched on it. It's so important. As parents, the best job we can do is try and lay those foundations for our kids. And I think the conversation has shifted so much from when I was competing. We never talked about mental health. Like that was considered such a weakness. Right?
I know. And you mentioned it. You said disability is as much of a mental health battle than a physical one.
Yeah. And that's because of everything else, that goes on around. And I think that as a mother now, I just want to make sure that my kids have grounded morals and values, and that they're driven to achieve. And as you said, to thrive and be the best version of themselves. Being the best version of yourself is obviously different to the next person and everyone. But you're right. There's a fine line between, for example, people often say to me, how do you do all of the things you do? I can't not be doing something. That's just my personality. I need to always have a goal. I need to be working towards something big. And however, what I've learned is to be able to have these coping mechanisms that if it doesn't go to plan, that's okay. I made a choice. I wanted to work in one direction and things have changed. So now I have to shift to another direction. I think what I've been able to do is create enough safety for myself to make those decisions. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle, is that when it doesn't go their way, when things have changed and it's not that sort of linear progression, we get so overwhelmed with that. So we need to work on, exactly. What do those transitions look like? How do you fail forward? It's like, okay, this didn't work out the way I thought it was. I've made a mistake, but what do I learn from it and take with me to try again or to do something different? And that's what I want to be able to teach for my children and to role models, this idea of critical thinking. How can we look outside the box and have an open perspective for all of the decisions that we make?
Becoming an advocate, that obviously didn't happen overnight. How did you find yourself in a position where you felt that you needed to share your story, experiences, advocate for those around you? How did that sort of transpire to be what it is now?
I remember after the Paralympic Games being asked to come and be a motivational speaker, share a bit about my story. And the more I started to talk about the struggles of body image and diversity and things like that, that's what people wanted to hear more. So it was kind of confronting for me as well, because I thought I don't want to talk about those particular things, but people wanted to hear and they were willing to listen. And so I also used social media at the time, just when Instagram was starting. I thought, how can I start and use this as a positive platform to talk about body image? And I created a campaign at the time, which did very, very well, like years in 10 years ago now. And that sort of catapulted me into this world of activism. And I found myself being asked to come and share my story and to help other people share theirs. And it just kept happening and it just made sense. But again, I realized it wasn't about just me and my story. I had to make sure that I was opening up that conversation for other people to share their experiences so that everyone else in the world could see how significant it was and how important it was. Disability in particular, I think moving here to the UAE, almost 6 years ago, I saw an opportunity to be able to have very important conversations that perhaps weren't being had at the time.
They weren't. Look, I think it's, whether it's a cultural thing, whether it's just the society smaller, the conversation around disability was not something that, especially 6 years ago, 10 years ago, I grew up here. So 30 years ago, these conversations were non-existent.
Yeah.
And I do think, honestly, single-handedly, you have changed the landscape and included a lot of these discussions, whether it's in schools or in different organizations, in government entities. And I think that's very important because here I feel is where you kind of need the focus, where the conversations aren't being had.
Yeah.
So coming here, was that, I guess, in the plan?
It wasn't necessarily the plan. I mean, I came here with two very small children, a 3-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, and then I fell pregnant with my third. So I was very much consumed in motherhood and trying to figure this out, and babies and healthcare and all of this stuff. And then COVID happened. So I felt very isolated and very alone for those first couple of years. But I still was noticing that there wasn't a lot of discussion. And you notice that because when I would go to the mall or to the supermarket, like there would be a lot of pointing and staring to the point where I was like,
what is going on?
I feel uncomfortable again. Yeah. This isn't, I'm a grown adult. I shouldn't be having to deal with this again. And then I thought, okay, well, I have an opportunity. I had written a children's book in Australia and I had self-published and I really wanted to work on that again. And I thought I'd give it one last chance here in the UAE and see. And it's a series of children's books about a little girl with one arm on her first day at school, first swimming race, joining the band. And I wanted to write these stories because, again, when I was growing up, I never had characters that look like me in any of the children's books. So if I could create a resource that helped parents and teachers and caregivers to be able to start these really important conversations with children, then you're able to sort of nurture this conversation around that disability isn't wrong or bad. It's just different. And if you can read about it and read beautiful stories that connect children, then this is such a profound way. And I was so lucky to work with a publishing company here in the UAE, and it just completely took off. And I think that was a little bit surprising for me. I thought that I would have to push it a lot more than I have, or I thought, I would get more resistance, I guess, but I haven't. And I think that just goes to show that the conversation and the landscape is changing so much here in the UAE, and the leaders of the UAE, they understand, they know that this is the conversations that need to be had. And I'm just very fortunate that I've had the opportunity to be part of some of those really important discussions. Yeah. And, like you said, with children, with corporates, with all sorts of different organizations and people from different backgrounds. And it resonates because we all know someone living with disability and we all have a connection in some way. And I think for a lot of people, it's how do we have those conversations? What's the right terminology? How can we make sure people feel safe and comfortable to talk about something that has historically been pushed to the side because we don't know what to say? And I like to think that by sharing my story and sharing it with children, that is a conversation that's being had with families at home, and it sure helps to
paving the way,
change the dialogue.
Yeah, paving the way. They're going to grow up, and they're going to be teaching that to their children. And it's do you find that there is a change?
I really do. Yeah. And I think that has come from a lot of the corporate work that I do, being asked to come and consult for many organizations. And that just shows there has been a shift. And with the kids, absolutely. I mean, in the last sort of 6 months, I have visited so many schools around the UAE and had the opportunity to speak at other schools around the world. Children are brutally honest, and we need to encourage that. We need to teach children how to understand what they see. As adults, we need to validate that. So when I go into a classroom, obviously the first question is, what happened to your arm? And once they tell them I was born like this, they're like, okay. They're interested in, how do I tie my shoelaces? There's a lot of the questions have come from a place of curiosity, and we need to encourage that from our children. How can we teach our children to ask questions respectfully and politely, rather than telling them to
don't ask that question. We have this thing in Arabic called aib, like shame. It's aib. Don't ask that question. So it's that. It's not aib. You're a curious person. You can ask that question, but let's do it respectfully.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's wonderful. I obviously stalked you in a massive way. And I find, the work that you do also with organizations. It was a recent TED Talk you did on technology.
Yeah.
The technology and disability. And honestly, I found that so fascinating. And how you the one thing that stuck out for me, again, you mentioned that technology and disability have to collaborate, or technology and humanity have to collaborate together. Yeah. And I just thought that in itself was a bit of a light bulb moment, because now we're entering a world of AI and all this. I find it's a massive leap of technology and massive advancements. But you can't forget about being human and what we need as a group of people. And I thought that in itself, it was fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I've had the opportunity to trial a new prosthetic hand, bionic hand, and I don't need to wear one. We use one. I can adapt. I've done everything with just one hand my entire life, but I was so intrigued by the new technology. And I do often wear the bionic arm, because the technology has advanced so much. And what that can do when we collaborate with humanity, and we do that from a place of intention that's to help somebody else, we're going to see so many more profound changes. And the technology, today is, honestly, I've never seen anything like that, especially with devices that can help people with living with disability, to the point where, and I know that this day will come, where it might be an advantage to live with disability because of the way
you're half human, half robot. Yeah. And I just thought it was the way that you've approached that specific talk. Honestly, I heard it maybe twice, because it was just to welcome technology, but to keep humanity very much in the forefront.
Yes.
And I just found that was interesting. And I'm assuming you're talking to or with a group of people who are all potential founders and in that space. And that in itself is creating a massive shift. So I just love that it's almost like you've got an edge.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And I wanted to, again, I saw another opportunity to talk about this important issue, because whether it's, young tech-minded, entrepreneurs, or whether it's people who are engineers working in this specific space, never forget who the end user is.
Absolutely.
I'm not an engineer. I'm not creating this technology, but I'm the one using the technology. So you need to include me in the conversations, and it needs to be user friendly. I think a lot of people at the moment are getting so fixated on creating something that looks amazing, but
you can't use it, or it's too expensive.
Exactly. It's too expensive. I can't access it. Or if it actually is more of a hindrance, then it's not actually helping anyone. So we have to always look through the lens of diversity and disability from the beginning, not in hindsight, and think, okay, how can we change this to help the people it was designed for? We'll include them at the beginning.
Absolutely. Oh, it was one of my favorite. I loved every minute of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just loved everything about that particular TED Talk. You guys have to check it out, which I'm sure they all have. Of course, receiving the Pride of Australia medal. Huge.
Yeah.
How did you feel?
A little bit of imposter syndrome, because you never set out with the idea that you're doing any of this work to be awarded for it. I think that, that was never my intention. But of course, when you do receive, prestigious awards, it validates the work that you're doing. And so for me, it was like, well, I'm on the right track. I have to keep going. And so Pride of Australia, Order of Australia medal, incredible recognition. And I think when I was awarded the Order of Australia medal, I was one of the youngest females in Australia, often they award Olympians and Paralympians, but I had been awarded this due to my commitment to sport, but also to community. And for me, again, it was just this validation that this is the work that I need to be doing and that people are watching. And often we don't realize just who's watching, and so it was a huge, huge honor. And for me, I wear, the medal, the badge, metaphorically with a lot of pride, but with a lot of responsibility. So you can't just get that recognition and say, okay, I'm done. It's like, okay, well, what are we going to do now?
Yeah. I was going to say, does it motivate you to just
it does.
Keep spreading the word and keep doing what you're doing?
Absolutely.
I wanted to, you touched a little bit about your book.
Yes.
Just Jessica. When did you start that series?
I started writing when I was pregnant with my first child, my daughter. I remember standing in a bookstore and I thought, I want to buy, books that are diverse. And there was such a lack of diversity in the characters that I was seeing. So this is probably 8-9 years ago.
Okay.
And
it's a series. It
is a series. So it sort of follows, Jessica, the main character, on a few different adventures. But what's been amazing is that in that time, in the space of 10 years, we've seen so many extraordinary books being published that do highlight and celebrate diversity and beautiful stories. Mm. But what the important message is, it's not a book about disability. And because I don't want people to think, well, give this book or buy this book for a particular person. It's for everybody to read. It's for every child to have a fun, beautiful story with a character that just happens to have a disability. And I think that the publishing space has welcomed a lot more books like this, which is fantastic. And I think that, they should be on every bookstore and every bookshelf around the world, of course. But it helped me to also realize the importance of having those conversations with not just my children, but children everywhere. But especially, when I think that my 3 children will face challenges in their life because of the fact that their mum lives with disability, like that's 100% going to happen. I know that. So this is also my legacy to them, to be able to say, I'm doing what I can to be part of the conversation you're having with your friends at your age, to help you on your path to feel comfortable with the fact that your mum looks different and that you might be teased or bullied because of that. How can they be proud and confident of where they come from and be able to respond to any sort of negativity that they received on the playground or whatever? And I can't control that. I can just do what I can with the books and with my messaging to children that they engage with.
Yeah. I feel like your journey, your professional journey, your personal journey is quite extensive. And then there's obviously, we all have another journey, which is a motherhood journey. Yeah. What was that like?
Motherhood has been a beautifully,
definitely
the hardest one. It's been a beautifully exhausting journey. And I probably mourned for a good 12 to 18 months and without really realizing, after I had my daughter.
Oh, it was the same. My old life, trying to get my old life back, realizing that it's never going to be the same.
Exactly. Because you kind of go into motherhood think, oh, well, it'll just be the same. I'll just have like a young child with, but it's not. And you do change. And I think I was changing and I wasn't necessarily liking the fact that I was changing, but I now realize that I've grown into who I'm supposed to be and that my children have given me the opportunity to chase even more dreams and to, again, go out my comfort zone even more, because who am I, if I'm not role modeling all of these wonderful ideas and thoughts for them?
Absolutely.
But it's exhausting. It's exhausting. And that juggle is very real. And I'm just still doing the best that I can. I still make mistakes every single 100%. Day. My children tell me.
We're all in it together.
But I think they've given me a sense of creativity as well, and a newfound sense of my
a different
identity.
Perspective.
Absolutely.
They just have a different perspective. Yeah. I always find sometimes, I always say parenting is the hardest thing I've ever done, and sometimes quite draining in every aspect, physically, emotionally, mentally, whatever it is. But then there are moments of magic that you just hold on to. Yeah. Those moments of magic, which is the change in perspective, or when you see something and you think, oh, wow, that's that's a really good kid, or
Yes.
this must have come from me, or,
Yes,
some
exactly.
sort of validation.
Yeah.
I find these are the moments I live for. And I just find, if you've got three.
Yes.
And they probably all have different personalities,
Completely
different opinions and
yeah.
different ideas. And it's wonderful. And I find sometimes in this busy world and our busy lives to take a moment and actually, I mean, obviously we have jobs, we've got families and things like that. So to be so busy into our everyday lives, and then all of a sudden something happens and you think, hold on, let me put my phone down and just pay attention to what this little person is saying. It's beautiful.
Yeah. It's very grounding. And I think, what I've realized is that my children are teaching me so much every day. And when I do, engage and have those really,
profound moments.
Moments of connection, you realize that these little humans are profound in their own way and knowledgeable and worldly, and they teach us so much if we allow them to. I sort of grew up with my parents were the adults and I was a child.
Same.
That very strict. And for me, I'm like, how can I have more conversations with my children? And even that, I mean, my daughter who is 8, and the conversations and the way she speaks back sometimes, I'm like, wow, this is so intense. But I have to nurture that as well. How do I encourage her to be a strong female?
Absolutely.
While still staying grounded and respectful and true to her morals and values? It's not easy.
Do you talk to them a lot about your swimming career and the challenges that you faced?
I try not to focus on it too much, because for my children, the way I look is normal as well. But I think I don't want to focus on it to the point where they think, okay, this is an issue that we'll have to continually talk about.
Yeah.
But that's not easy as well. Sometimes I'm like, this is what I had to face and this is the struggles that I had to face. What I try to do is use different examples to instill this level of empathy. And because we still don't see a disability a lot in the UAE, whenever we do, my children react just the same as any other child. Oh my goodness, look at that person. And for me to be able to practice what I preach in those moments as a mother can be confronting sometimes as well, wanting to say, hey, like
that's not kind.
Yeah. To then say, oh yes, that person's in a wheelchair. Or you know what I mean?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. And it's just, you want to be able to correct whatever happened in particular pretty fast.
Yeah.
And then you think, no, that's not the right way. You need to go down on the eye level, explain. Yeah.
And have these learning moments.
Yeah.
And knowing that, as you said, 3 different personalities and how they respond and how they react is different as well. But doing the best that I can to not focus and emphasize too much on certain challenges, but show them what I can do.
Yeah.
And I think that's where my focus is, and that's why I'm still very active and I try to do, sports and all sorts of things that show them how my body does work, and instead of focusing, okay, yes, I only have one arm but there's nothing that I can't do, and for them to see that. Okay.
You recently finished the marathon.
I did. Yeah. I ran Paris Marathon a year ago and then I've just came back from running the Tokyo Marathon.
Amazing.
It was a midlife crisis.
Was it? I was going to say, it's difficult.
It's difficult. And, my background is swimming. Running wasn't really my focus. But again, I wanted to set myself a new physical challenge. And I'm very much of that mindset. Like if someone else can do it, I can do it. And then halfway through the training, I was like, it's a lot of training. It's a lot of kilometers.
I didn't expect it's a lot of kilometers.
Yeah. But there's something, I think it's only 1% of the population that will ever run a marathon.
I've done a 10K and I thought, and I just thought, what?
Yeah. So I think I've done 2 and it's funny because
2 marathons, that's
yeah. And if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I was like, why would I run a marathon? That's just ridiculous. Like,
do you find,
not interested.
Are you interested in running now?
I am.
Yeah.
So
nice.
It's this I really enjoy it. I enjoy running and I've met so many people that I would otherwise never have met, and you all come together, share this common goal, and all of the goals are different, but you're there running together. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's really quite beautiful. I never really wanted to run with other people. I was always, too intimidated. But now
it's like a community.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's wonderful.
It's lovely. It's funny how life has its things. You've got a sort of an Olympic swimmer who is now an avid runner.
You're dabbling in it.
Dabbling in it. You also consult across the UAE.
Yes.
Is that, again, something that sort of you went off on a tangent, or was that always in the plan?
I think it kind of just fell into the work that I was doing. I would often go into organizations and sort of run a workshop and talk about disability accessibility. And then from there, there was this opportunity to do more with these particular organizations. Okay, how can we embed this into our policies and procedures and to actually create change within our organization? And so sort of developed that over the last few years. And then I work with other organizations internationally to help them with their consulting with organizations around the world. But it kind of all falls under that same umbrella, whether I'm consulting or working with, a boardroom of people or a kindergarten class.
Which one do you think is more difficult?
Do you know what? I think it's more difficult to talk to leadership in organizations because people are very stuck in their ways. It's much harder to change. Young children are fun. They're just, they're oblivious to wrong and right. And in terms of diversity, I mean, they see difference and they just want to point it out. And I think trying to change behaviors and perceptions and ideas of adults is much harder.
100%
really impossible.
It's impossible. Yeah. I mean, I think that I think raising kids is hard as a parent, but talking to children as opposed to adults, it's much easier.
I think so.
Yeah, 100%. I'm with you. Essentially, I feel like I always ask anyone who sits on this chair, if you were to go back, and you can pick any stage in your life, and to have a conversation with a younger version of yourself. The first one is, what stage of your life would you go back to, and what would you say?
I would probably go back to those years when I was training and competing, but also battling with eating disorders. And the thing is, I wouldn't tell that younger person to change anything. I would just tell them to trust the process, and I think that was the thing. Like, I was battling so much with everything coming at me, and it's terrifying. I think if I could just say that it's going to be okay.
I cannot tell you. So we've now finished about 60 episodes almost. That's the exact advice that every single person would say, including myself. Yeah. That it will be fine.
It will be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's a tough time and you're going to get through it.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
I think so. I think because you also get to this point in life where you realize that you are who you are now because of everything that you went through.
That was also my other question. Any regrets? Anything that you would...
No. And I mean, it was hard. I had some very, very low moments and moments where I thought I wasn't going to, be here the next day type thing. But I don't regret anything because I'm who I am today because of everything, because of all the baggage that I carry with me.
Proudest moment?
Becoming a mother. Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
It does go up there, doesn't it? Yeah. I feel like it overshadows almost everything.
I think so because, it's what you've created and I don't think, as much as we can sort of mold and help, direct our children, it's also proud to know that there comes a time when they have to then go off and be themselves and, I'm not there yet.
Yeah. But, no, neither am I, luckily.
Yeah. But just proud of that whole process, keeping them alive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just getting through the day to day.
Exactly.
What's next?
I'm focusing a lot on the children's books, and I have an initiative to read to 1 million children around specifically the UAE, but ideally, around the world. So visiting literally every school, every nursery, and just getting as many children as possible to read about diverse characters.
Are you coming to King's?
I've been to King's and I am going to come back to King's. I have the books in Arabic now as well as English. So fantastic. Yeah, it's a big mission. And I know that I can't necessarily read to 1 million children myself. So I have teams of volunteers within corporate organizations and other people who read to their child's class. So
I only just recently went to Lay's class and I read a book, but it was just like,
there you
go. But I'm happy to read.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Just to spread the message. The more diverse stories we can engage with our children, the easier their minds, are able to adapt and understand that this is just life.
That's beautiful. I love that. I'm definitely going to get my hands on their books. Yeah. I'm going to do it next reading session.
They're available all UAE bookstores. So,
amazing. Yes. I always end the podcast with a quote. Mm-hmm. I'm going to tell you my quote. I just find it gives a really nice context to the entire discussion. And then I'm going to ask you for one from your end. So mine is, I don't need easy. I just need possible.
I love that.
Yeah. I don't need it to be.
No.
I don't need it to be simple at all. I just need to be able to know that I could potentially do it.
Yeah.
What would yours be?
I don't know where this comes from, but you will never be criticized by somebody doing more than you. And for me, when I first heard that, I was like, oh, wow. But for two reasons. Yes, you think, okay, there's no reason for somebody who's further ahead of us to sort of look back and be down on us.
Absolutely.
But then anytime I wanted to criticize somebody else, where was that coming from?
Exactly.
It comes from a place of jealousy and
insecurity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So whenever I think or I attempt to criticize somebody else, it allows me to go, well, hang on a second. You need to ask yourself what's going on here.
That's actually really powerful because it is a moment of introspection. Why are you criticizing?
Yeah, exactly. What's that about? What's that? And usually when we are sitting in this place of wanting to criticize somebody else, it's because it's some area of our own that we aren't satisfied with. And as you said, those insecurities. So it allows me to think, okay, well, if I'm succeeding and I'm doing well and people are criticizing me, that's something that they need to do. That's on them.
It's not on me.
As long as I'm a good person and I'm staying true to my goals, my morals, and my values, I know I'm on the right direction. But if I begin to criticize somebody else, I need to check in with myself.
Put my finger on what's going on.
Absolutely.
I cannot thank you enough. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you for giving me over an hour, 2 hours of your time, basically.
Thank you for having me.
It was an absolute pleasure. Jessica, thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to They Say It Takes a Village. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I look forward to bringing you another one next week. Don't forget, please subscribe, rate, and review so I can reach and help even more parents. And if you've got a topic that you'd like me to cover, please head over to my Instagram page, ittakesavillage.me, and drop me a line.